Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Charts with Dan. We've got a lot to get to this week. We are actually using the dreaded estimates, but not by my choice. It's because the finals were not reported yesterday because of the Martin Luther King Jr. Day weekend here in the United States, but that's all right. Quick programming note, this will be my last news show from right here in the studio because I'm heading out today to Park City, Utah to cover the Sundance Film Festival for 2 weeks. So you're going to see me on the road for the next little bit. But special note, tomorrow, many of you have been asking when the next time I'll be able to get together with my old pals Joe Starr and Spencer Gilbert will be. Well, we were finally able to get something on the schedule 30 months after the last time that we did it. So there will be a new episode of whatever our hangout show is called here on the channel tomorrow. We don't even know. We're going to need your help with that. It was a lot of fun to get back together with those guys and do that show. So look out for that. Of course, I'll also be covering the Oscar nominations on Thursday. Everything will be covered. I'll just be in Utah instead of here. But let's jump now to the box office for this past weekend. And the number one movie in its fifth weekend was once again Avatar: Fire and Ash with a 32.6% drop and a $14.5 million 3-day weekend. This is just the Friday through Sunday number. In second place, a surprisingly low second place, was 28 years later, The Bone Temple, which opened to $13 million. That is less than half of what the last film 28 years later opens to. And I think that it's a consequence of perhaps maybe the more polarizing reception for 28 years later, because many people, myself included, liked this movie more than the last one. Not that I dislike 28 years later. And we often see this where a movie will kind of bear the consequence of how the last movie felt. With Nia DaCosta, who is the director of 28 years later, The Bone Temple, this is kind of the same thing that happened with The Marvels, where she is the leader, the director of a franchise project that's kind of paying the price for the projects that came before it. Although I have to say, I did not like The Marvels at all. 28 years later, The Bone Temple, I quite enjoyed. But it's disappointing to see a movie that seems to have been received so well not do well at the box office, at least in the first weekend. We'll see how it does as we go forward. In third place was Zootopia 2 in week number 8. It dropped just 8%. To bring in another $9.2 million. It's doing incredibly well. It's now at $390.4 million. We're going to look at how it's stacking up for the race to be the number one movie of 2025 domestically. The Housemaid also continuing to hold well. It dropped 21.5%, brought in another $8.5 million. It's now over $100 million domestic. The legs on this movie have been incredible. Marty Supreme dropped 26.8% in the first weekend after Timothée Chalamet won the Golden Globe, and we'll see how it does at the Oscars this upcoming week, at least as far as nominations go. $79.6 million. It crossed a very important threshold that we're going to talk about in a couple minutes. Primate, which opened last week, dropped 55% in its second week to bring in another $5 million. It's at $19.6 million. Then we have The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring. It was a re-release of the extended edition, or I guess you would maybe just call it a release of the extended edition. $3.4 million. Fathom put all 3 Lord of the Rings films into release this past weekend. Greenland 2 Migration dropped 58.6% for a $3.48 million weekend and a $14.2 million total. That's really the only thing I've heard about Greenland in the media or the news or anything. This movie, that's it. Anaconda dropped 33.6% in its fourth weekend to bring in $3.3 million. It's now above $50 million domestically. And rounding out the top 10 is The Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers, which brought in $2.4 million. Return of the King was also just outside the top 10. Dropping out of the top 10 this past weekend, we had the SpongeBob movie, Search for SquarePants, after 4 weeks, David, after 4 weeks, and Song Sung Blue, after 3 weeks. We'll see if Song Sung Blue specifically can get boosted by a potential Oscar nomination for Kate Hudson. She got the SAG Award nomination. We'll see if she can get that Oscar nom. As far as the biggest theater count changes for this past weekend, Dead Man's Wire added over 1,000 theaters. It didn't do particularly well, but it did get put into wide release for an 1,100 theater total. David dropped to 953 theaters. It's still in over 1,500. Another film from Angel Studios, I Was a Stranger, dropped 880 theaters. It's now in just 520. Wicked for Good fell out of wide release. It dropped 728 theaters. It's now in 414. And Song Sung Blue dropped 669 theaters. It's now in 1,593. This is the 2026 versus 2025 weekend box office, and I've added some posters to last year's numbers just to give you context as far as what the number one movie was at this point last year. And for the third consecutive weekend, 2026 has done better than we saw in 2025. It was 10.4% above what we saw last year for this past weekend. And you can see that the number one movies for last year were Mufasa, Den of Thieves 2, and then Mufasa again. I think perhaps a stronger holiday slate with Avatar, with other movies that have performed well, has kind of helped to boost the January box office. And we'll see if that trend continues as we get into the last weekend of January coming up on Friday. All right, I mentioned this. This is what I'm calling the race for number one as far as the number one movie domestically released in 2025 between a Minecraft movie, Avatar Fire and Ash, and Zootopia 2. You can see each of these movies' daily cumulative grosses here, and Avatar Fire and Ash is still comparing favorably to a Minecraft movie, but it does look like it might be flattening out a little bit. A lot of the advancement it was making has kind of slowed. You see that gap is pretty consistent, but look at Zootopia 2. This could be literally the tortoise and the hare, the Judy Hopps, as far as what the number one movie is going to be, because Zootopia 2 continues to close the gap. Look at how big the gap was, 2 to 3 weeks into Zootopia 2's release. It has just closed so much due to the holidays and to the fact that Zootopia 2 has done so well, and it continues to advance on a Minecraft movie. I think this is going to be a very, very close call, as it was between a Minecraft movie and Lilo and Stitch. So it just depends on how Zootopia 2 does over the next couple weeks. All right, let's talk about some of the other movies that were in the top 10, and we'll start with 28 Years Later, The Bone Temple, and where it ranks among the 28 Later franchise. When you look at the raw numbers, it was the second best opening weekend in franchise history, again, significantly behind 28 Years Later, which opened to $30 million last June. This one opened to $13 million. That puts it above 28 Days Later and 28 Weeks Later, but this is an old franchise, and when you adjust for inflation, 28 Years The Bone Temple actually comes in last. 28 Weeks Later opened to $15.5 million adjusted. 28 Days Later opened to $18.2 million adjusted back in 2003. So a low mark for the franchise so far, although it sounds probable that the third movie that was very clearly set up at the end of The Bone Temple is going to be made, so we'll see what the decision is with the 28 Later franchise. When you look at Alex Garland, who wrote 28 Years Later, The Bone Temple, and his openings as either a writer, a director, or both, this was his third best opening, though again significantly behind both 28 Years Later and Civil War, which were numbers 1 and 2. It comes in ahead of Annihilation, 28 Days Later, Warfare, Dread, Ex Machina, Men, and Sunshine. That Sunshine number is its highest grossing weekend in limited release because Sunshine never actually got a wide release. I mentioned that there was a very notable milestone that Marty Supreme passed this past weekend. It is now the highest grossing A24 release ever domestically. It has passed Everything Everywhere All at Once, and it's looking more likely to become A24's first $100 million domestic grosser. It will also soon become the fourth A24 release to make over $100 million worldwide. It may already be there after Everything Everywhere All at Once, Civil War, and Materialist. So A24 with a significant investment in Marty Supreme, but it is seeing a lot of return on that investment, and there's still a lot of awards season to go, a lot of enhanced interest potentially in that film. I mentioned that The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring was in the top 10 this past weekend, and according to my research, that also means it's passed a milestone of its own 25 years after it was released, almost 25 years. And that brings us to this week's Charts with Dan trivia question. With its latest re-release, The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring is now the highest grossing film of 2001 domestically. What film did it just replace? And again, this is based on my research. I'll give you a minute to think. It might not be that hard to figure it out. The answer is Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. That's right. Two massive franchises, both controlled by Warner Brothers, launched in the same year within weeks of each other. But Fellowship of the Ring now goes down in the record books as the highest grossing film of 2001 domestically. Again, that's because traditionally re-releases are added to the original's box office gross. Now, you could quibble about the fact that it's the extended edition, not the theatrical. That's fine. But I believe as far as the records go, Fellowship of the Ring is now the champ. All right, let's move now from the domestic box office to the international box office. All the markets outside of the US and Canada. These were the top 5 films internationally this past weekend. At number 1 was Avatar Fire and Ash, which dropped 32.2% internationally to bring in $44.5 million. The Housemaid continues to do well, not just domestically, but around the world. It was up 4.3% from last weekend for a $26.6 million weekend. Zootopia 2 dropped 21.1% for $24.3 million. 28 years later, The Bone Temple opened to $16.2 million internationally, and Mana Shankara Vara Prasad Garu, may be right, may not be right, is in 5th place. This is a Telugu language film about a man protecting his family from a renegade cop. When you take those international numbers, you combine it with our domestic numbers, you get the top 5 films worldwide. And the number 1 movie around the world, once again, was Avatar Fire and Ash. It brought in another $57.8 million. That's an overall 33.5% drop from last weekend. It's at $1.31 billion. The Housemaid, the number 2 movie in the world, at $35.1 million. Its total now, reportedly, is nearing $250 million worldwide. Zootopia 2 brought in another $33 million. It's now at $1.7 billion, and we've got a major update as far as its worldwide gross in just a second. 28 years later, The Bone Temple opened to $29.2 million, and Marty Supreme, actually the number 5 movie in the world, at $9.8 million, as you can see there, just on the cusp, and probably by now has already passed $100 million worldwide. So in going over $1.7 billion, Zootopia 2 has now become the highest grossing Hollywood animated film of all time worldwide, passing Inside Out 2, and it is only behind Nudja 2 at $2.25 billion. It is the second highest grossing animated film of all time worldwide. So we have Nudja 2 and Zootopia 2, basically the 2 highest grossing animated films ever, both released in 2025. Then we have Inside Out 2, Frozen 2, the Super Mario Brothers movie. Of course, we get another one later this year. Frozen, Incredibles 2, Minions, Toy Story 4, and Toy Story 3. And Zootopia 2 has also now become one of the 10 highest grossing movies of all time worldwide. This actually surprised me. I guess I just lost track of it with the holidays and everything else going on, that it was even close to this list. But Jurassic World is now out of the all-time top 10. Inside Out 2 is now number 10. And Zootopia 2 is now number 9. Now, I don't think it's going to get to number 8. That's where Spider-Man No Way Home is at $1.92 billion. But still, it is impressive that Zootopia 2 was able to enter the all-time worldwide top 10. And again, on a longer timeline. That movie opened in November. This was not a movie that shot up onto the list in 13 or 14 or 21 days. It took, a couple months, but it made it there. This was just an incredibly popular film. Again, especially in China. China playing a huge role in both of the massive worldwide animated films of 2025. So congratulations, Zootopia 2, now one of the 10 highest grossing movies of all time around the world. Let's turn now to what I call some of our specialty charts, and we will look first at the top per theater averages domestically this past weekend. At number 1 was A Private Life, which opened in 5 theaters to $13,382 per theater. This movie premiered at the Cannes Film Festival last year and stars Jodie Foster as a psychiatrist investigating the death of one of her patients. In second place was The Testament of Anne Lee. Amanda Seyfried, still a contender for a potential Best Actress nomination. It expanded to 28 theaters and brought in $12,500 per theater. In third place was Sound of Falling, which won the jury prize at Cannes. It actually shared that prize with another movie named Sirat, and I think that both Sound of Falling and Sirat would probably be Oscar nominees locked in a weaker year for international cinema, but this is just a gangbusters year for movies around the world, so we'll see if Sound of Falling is able to get that Oscar nomination. In fourth place is a 4K restoration of a silent film from the 20s called Queen Kelly, which played in one theater and brought in $6,037 in that theater. Queen Kelly was directed by Eric von Stroheim. It starred Gloria Swanson, and the movie would later be featured in Sunset Boulevard, the great Billy Wilder film, where Swanson played a former silent film star named Norma Desmond, alongside Eric von Stroheim, who played her former director. A very complicated movie, Sunset Boulevard. It drew a lot from reality, and so this movie, not only in theaters this past weekend, but featured in one of the great all-time movies. And then rounding out the top 5 was Magellan, which played in 4 theaters and brought in $5,800 per theater. Looking at the top films in limited release, which I define as 1,000 theaters or fewer, No Other Choice expanded to 695 theaters and brought in $2.2 million. It was one of my favorite movies of the year. We'll see how it does at the Oscars on Thursday. Hamnet is in 718 theaters and brought in $1.34 million. It's been a gradual rollout, and again, it's expected to do well at the Oscar nominations. That's why it is now in its basically widest release ever. In third place was another film from India called Anagananga Oka Raju in an unknown number of theaters. It brought in nearly $700,000. Then we have All You Need Is Kill in 765 theaters. It brought in $400,000. And The Testament of Anne Lee in 28 theaters. It brought in a total of $350,000. Well, we are in 2026 firmly, and last week I asked members here on the channel what their most anticipated film of the year was, and some of the answers surprised me. The number one answer was Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey with 47 votes. Closely behind was Dune Part 3 with 43 votes. And then in third place was Godzilla Minus Zero. I agree. I'm very excited for that film. Avengers Doomsday comes in fourth place with 30 votes. If you would have told me 7 or 8 years ago that an Avengers film, a Marvel film, bringing back so many of the main characters and integrating so many other Marvel characters would only be number 4 on a viewer poll as far as most anticipated films of the year, I would be surprised by that, but the Marvel brand is not what it once was. Project Hail Mary, which has been getting great advance buzz, came in 5th place with 20 votes. Then we have Spider-Man Brand New Day with 18 votes, Coyote vs. Acme with 16 votes. I think the online controversy has really spurred interest in that movie. Digger, which is the latest film from Alejandro Iñárritu starring Tom Cruise, comes in with 10 votes, tied with Supergirl, which also gets 10 votes. Those were the only films that received 10 or more votes. A very diverse slate of movies here, though, and I have to admit, I am anticipating all of them to some degree or another. This week's Charts with Dan member poll question concerns the Academy Award nominations, which again will be revealed on Thursday. And I want to know what movie's exclusion from the Best Picture race would make you angriest. What movie, if it's not in the 10 movies that are announced for Best Picture, will you be the most upset if it is not in there? Put your favorite in the comments of the member poll, which is live now. If your answer is already there, please upvote it instead of leaving it twice, because that helps me count the results. And those results will be revealed on next week's Charts with Dan. All right, let's turn to some yearly numbers, and we will start with the 2025 fall holiday box office. There are still changes that are being made to this chart. These are all movies released after Labor Day. Zootopia 2 and Avatar Fire and Ash remain numbers 1 and 2, followed by Wicked for Good, The Conjuring Last Rites, and Demon Slayer Infinity Castle. Five Nights at Freddy's 2 is at number 6. The Housemaid is closing in on it, though, at number 7. Predator Badlands is at number 8. Marty Supreme debuts on the list at number 9. David stays at number 10, and Black Phone 2 drops off of the overall fall holiday box office chart. So Marty Supreme now making some noise as one of the 10 best movies released in the last third of 2025. And looking at the 2025 annual domestic box office, so all movies released in the year 2025, a Minecraft movie and Lilo and Stitch still very close at numbers 1 and 2. There's Zootopia 2, though. It's about $34 million behind a Minecraft movie. So if it can continue to do well, like I said, I think it's going to be a very close call. Avatar Fire and Ash moves up to become the 4th highest grossing film of the year. Superman moves down to number 5, and numbers 6 through 10 remain the same. So still some work to do on the 2025 charts. Looking at the 2026 domestic box office charts, so these are all movies released after January 1st. Primate, currently the highest grossing film of the year at $19.6 million. 28 years later, The Bone Temple enters the chart at number 2. Greenland 2 Migration is down to number 3. Then we have Fellowship of the Ring at number 4. We Bury the Dead down 2 spots to number 5. The Two Towers is at number 6. The Raja Saab is at number 7. I Was a Stranger is at number 8. And Dead Man's Wire is at number 9. Now, this is probably an incomplete list because the box office results I had from this past week were incomplete. It will probably be more complete on next week's show when I've got all the final numbers to go over. So don't worry, if there's some inaccuracies here, I will update this chart. And let's look at the annual domestic box office chart for all movies. So all tickets sold after January 1st, whether it was released in 2025 or 2026. Avatar Fire and Ash, the highest grossing film of the year at $117.6 million, followed by Zootopia 2, but The Housemaid is very close behind at $52.5 million. Marty Supreme at number 4, followed by Anaconda and the SpongeBob movie. Primate moves up 2 spots to number 7. I believe Primates gross here reflects some of that money reported that came in from Monday, so there may be some gross mismatches. As I said, it's kind of complicated because there were no final grosses that were reported. David is down 1 spot to number 8. Song Sung Blues down to number 9. And Greenland 2 Migration currently at number 10. So that's what I have for you at the box office. Let's take a look now at the world of streaming, and we will start with the latest numbers from Netflix, which reflect the first full week of 2026. These were the numbers from January 5th through the 11th, 2026, and the number 1 program on Netflix was His and Hers with 19.88 million views. His and Hers is a limited series starring Tessa Thompson and John Bernthal. Second was the Netflix film People We Meet on Vacation, about 2 friends and their week-long vacations over the years. That brought in 17.19 million views. Runaway is at number 3 with 15.62 million views. Then we have Stranger Things Season 5, which is following a trend we've seen with a lot of Netflix shows, 9.27 million views. We saw it with Wednesday. We saw it with some of their other programming, which is that it remains popular, but we have seen a decrease in viewership from the previous seasons. Now, we'll see where it all shakes out, but Stranger Things Season 5, not a dominant force beyond its first couple weeks on the chart, like we often see with Netflix stuff, but Stranger Things is the one I thought, yeah, maybe that one, I think there's just so much, and the reception on it wasn't as enthusiastic as many other seasons. Evil Influencer is at number 5 at 9.06 million views. Then we have Me Before You, which is the only non-original entry on this list, at 8.57 million views. K-Pop Demon Hunters enters 2026, where it spent a lot of 2025 still on the overall Netflix top 10 at 7.56 million views. The Great Flood is at number 8, Stranger Things Season 1 at number 9, and Emily in Paris Season 5 rounding out the top 10. Let's take a look now at the latest numbers from Nielsen, which are domestic numbers only, not global like the Netflix numbers we just looked at. And they're delayed by about a month because that's how Nielsen operates. So these cover the dates of December 15th through the 21st, the week before Christmas. And let's look at the most watched streaming movies. At number 1 in its first full week of release was Wake Up Dead Man, with 18.3 million hours watched. So domestically, we're seeing basically the same thing the global numbers for Netflix showed, which is that it's good viewership, but not incredibly impressive viewership. Home Alone is at number 2 with 10.48 million hours watched, followed by How the Grinch Stole Christmas, starring Jim Carrey. Then we have Home Alone 2 on Disney Plus at number 4. Elf at number 5 re-enters the chart on HBO Max. This is really peak Christmas movie watching time. It's why you see so many on this list. Paw Patrol: The Mighty Movies at number 6. Red One, starring Dwayne Johnson, it re-enters the charts. That's what a lot of people said about Amazon, is they wanted to make that movie not just for what it would do for them the year it was released, but for the fact that it would be back on the chart every holiday season. It's there at number 7. The Grinch, the animated version from Illuminations, at number 8. Then we have The Great Flood on Netflix at number 9. So not as overwhelming domestically as we saw globally as far as watch time, 5.9 million hours watched. And National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation rounds out the top 10 at 5.6 million hours watched. These were the top 10 most watched streaming shows for December 15th to the 21st. Stranger Things, still a dominant number 1 at 39.5 million hours watched. When you look at that compared to the Netflix numbers, I think what it tells you is that Stranger Things maybe had a strong pull domestically, perhaps stronger than it did in many places around the world. Landman is at number 2 at 26.8 million hours watched. A very successful second season so far for Landman. NCIS is at number 3. Emily in Paris returns with 13.85 million hours watched at number 4. Homeland is at number 5. Fallout returns with 13.2 million hours watched. Now, I have seen a lot of articles, or a few, talking about how drastically the viewership for Fallout has dropped between season 1 and season 2. It makes for a nice headline, but what they neglect to mention is that the release structure of Fallout has changed between season 1 and season 2. It is now a weekly show, so you don't have all of those episodes to watch at once. So yes, your watch time is going to fall drastically when you completely change the way that you release your seasons. So I think this is another case where you often see headlines that are written that are not technically untrue, but they're still kind of deceptive. We'll have to wait till we get to the end of this season of Fallout to see how the viewership compares to season 1, because because when you change the number of hours that people can watch at a time, yes, that is going to affect the weekly hours watched for any show. Bluey is at number 7, followed by It, Welcome to Derry, as it wrapped up its season at 11.35 million hours watched. Grey's Anatomy's at number 9, and The Big Bang Theory returning to the top 10 at number 10. As far as the top streaming shows by watch time per available episode, Sean Combs' The Reckoning remains number 1 at 2.16 million hours per episode. Then we have Landman at 1.68 million hours per episode. Fallout comes in at number 3 at 1.47 million hours per episode, followed by Welcome to Derry at 1.42 million, and Stranger Things at over 1 million hours per episode. But keep in mind, that's for each of its 38 available episodes. The Beast in Me is at number 6, followed by Pluribus, Percy Jackson, and the Olympians. Castle Rock, which actually made a return to the streaming charts, and I think it's because of the interest in Welcome to Derry. A lot of people saying, well, let me check out this other Stephen King show. And then Emily in Paris, rounding out the top 10 at 277,000 hours watched per episode. And those are all the numbers I have for you. Before I go, though, just a quick look at some things you might be interested in, both at home and in theaters, if you're looking for stuff to watch this week. First of all, today on Tuesday, the SpongeBob movie Search for SquarePants, reportedly available to watch, both digitally and for premium video on demand. Then on Thursday, as I mentioned, we will have the Oscar nominations bright and early. You'll have my breakdown of that as soon as I can get it out on Thursday morning. On Friday, theatrically, we're entering the slower part of the year. 28 years later, The Bone Temple kind of boosted what is often a much slower month. The biggest release is Mercy, which is in wide release everywhere. Chris Pratt is on trial for murder in this latest Timur Bekmambetov movie that takes place on a screen. He loves directing those kinds of films. Rebecca Ferguson is the judge, and Pratt has 90 minutes to prove his innocence. Clica, which is a movie about an aspiring Mexican-American musician, which was produced by the CEO of the Rancho Humilde label, is getting a nationwide release, so you can check that out this upcoming weekend. And then Return to Silent Hill hits theaters. This is the third Silent Hill film from the director of the first one back in 2006, Christoph Gans. It is adapting, reportedly, the Silent Hill 2 video game. If you enjoy watching things that might end in disaster, Skyscraper Live will be airing on Netflix this Friday. If you've seen the documentary Free Solo, you know who Alex Honnold is and how nervous he makes you. He's going to be climbing a skyscraper live. It's a very good title. But if you're into something maybe a little less stressful, Gabby's Dollhouse, the movie, will be making its debut on Peacock this Friday. The Smashing Machine will be debuting on HBO Max on Friday. I think there was maybe some anticipation that it would be coming off a Dwayne Johnson Oscar nomination. And Springsteen Deliver Me From Nowhere, ditto with Jeremy Allen White, will be debuting on Hulu this Friday. That's all I've got for you this week. As I mentioned, you can look for me in Utah for the next couple weeks. Check out my new show with Spencer and Joe tomorrow. But it's going to be a really fun couple weeks. I will be continuing to do Charts with Dan and providing updates and probably even reviewing a new movie or two while I'm at Sundance. But you can also look for some updates from the festival, perhaps some reviews of the movies I'm seeing, some stuff to look out for. And then when it's all done, I will have a comprehensive review of all the movies that I saw and talk about the experience. I'm very happy I could be there for the last year that Sundance is going to be in Park City. And if you're in Park City, you're going to be at the Sundance Film Festival. You see me wandering around Main Street, come say hi. I love when people say hi. It's nice to know that there are people out there watching. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, stay safe, and I'll see you then. Bye.